Before I begin, I feel it is necessary to point out that the news arm of the BBC has yet to retract, apologize, or otherwise address the deeply transphobic reporting it has engaged in the last few months. In a pinned comment down below, you'll find my original video on the topic, several videos from the YouTuber Sean, who has been ongoing in his pursuit of trying to get the BBC to own up to what they have done, and also a video from Laura Kate Dale showing the protests that have taken place outside of the BBC offices. While I don't feel any of the people behind Doctor Who are in any way responsible for this, I cannot in good conscience talk about a BBC-owned property without mentioning this first, until such time as it is properly redressed. Thank you. Well, let's see if we can find any treasure in this one. The Legend of the Sea Devils. We are coming to the end of Jodie Whittaker's time as the Doctor, and this time we get the return of a classic era Doctor Who creature, which I fairly recently rewatched the original appearance of. You can check that review out there if you haven't seen it already, over in the break room of Geeks. But I like the Sea Devils. I've always kind of liked the Sea Devils, and I was excited to see them back. I was excited for pirates. I like pirates. I like Curse of the Black Spot more than it deserves simply because it has pirates. So this thing, it was kind of teeing up for me to probably like it. And it's okay. I mean, that's kind of it. Here's what's interesting about this one. It's not great. However, this is a case where most of the problems with it, I can actually chalk up to the fact that it isn't longer. I've seen some people say that like this should have been like a 2 or even 3-part story. I'm not sure it needed that. It did need at least 15 more minutes, minimum, because I'm seeing all this stuff there and all this stuff that's in place. I'm like, it's not that it's not working. It's that it needs a little bit more time than it gets. And there's a lot of stuff I feel that with, and none of it's stuff that I would cut. So in a more poorly constructed thing, I might think, okay, look, there was enough time, but you should have cut this entire subplot thing. Then you would have had the time to give everything else its due. Like, I'm not sure there's anything I'd actually cut from this, but it does need more time than it gets. I feel like the guest characters are a really good example of that. So, like, whether we're talking Madam Ching or Ji-hun or I forget the other character's name, but the one whose father dies in the opening, Ying Ki, something like that. With those three, by the end, I actually was like, you know what? The actors are putting a fair amount of characterization into them, all three. And like they have moments, again, especially towards the end, where it's like this feels like a culmination of moments that we didn't get. So it doesn't feel like the performances are bad. It feels like the performances are good, but we're missing a little bit more time, a little bit more connective tissue, a little bit more chances for characterization than they actually got to have. I think similarly with the lead Sea Devil as well. Actually decently characterized. I kind of like right off the bat, the Doctor says Sea Devil and he's like, land parasite or something like that, because like Sea Devil's not what they should actually be called. That was just what some dude at like a lighthouse or a radar station or whatever the heck it was in the original story called them. And that's just what they've been known as ever since. That's not what they actually are. So as far as he's concerned, that's an insult. So I like he just spat an insult right back at the Doctor. And it was kind of funny that she got offended by it. Like, did you not realize that when you called him but I like the design. It reminds me in a lot of ways of the redesign on the Ice Warriors. Incredibly reminiscent, immediately identifiable as what it was in the classic era, but zhuzhed up just enough to not feel completely dated. This is one of the few cases where I feel like it works, where they have the glowing thing on him that lights up as he talks, because they've also got like movement. They've got like a bladder in the neck, so it's like So it's moving, but it doesn't have to lip sync mouth movements, which is ultimately one of the hardest things to do in animatronics, is to try and match lip movements to normal, natural sounding speech. They get around that by having so there's movement here, but the sound is linking to this. That's a good compromise. They bring back sort of the whispery nature of the Sea Devil's voice without it sounding as annoying and slow as it did in the original. They move pretty decently. There's nice movement in the eyes, even subtle movements at times, like narrowing the eyes and stuff. I thought they looked good. I don't think they ever confirmed that the sea monster was the Merca. I wish they would have. I'm going to assume it is. Here's the main reason it annoys me that I didn't catch them confirming that was the Merca. If you don't know classic Doctor Who, the Merca appeared in a classic Doctor Who episode called Warriors of the Deep, which is real bad. Real bad. Reviewed it there with Stu Bagfull. Holy cow, that thing's so bad. And the Merca is one of the most infamous things about it. But I really like the idea of going back to something that flat out didn't work and giving it another go. Part of the reason I kind of wish they had identified it as the Merca is because there really isn't a reason for it to be there. So you might as well give us the proper fan service of acknowledging what it is. And before you jump and say, well, could that be the subplot that was cut? Things got 45 seconds total screen time altogether. And another thing that feels like it's reminiscent of this as originally scripted may have even intended to have had more time. There's a couple of points where things just jump forward in weird ways. So suddenly Madame Ching's back on her boat. When? Last we saw it, she was on land with the companions and with Ying. But now suddenly she's back on her ship and the kid wants to go follow her, and Dan is with him, and it was okay, I guess we'll do that. And the Doctor is with Yaz and the TARDIS and be well, we'll just leave Dan and go do something. I'm whoa. It's like we completely dropped a scene to get Madame Ching back to her ship. So the stuff that's wrong with it is that kind of stuff. It's nuts and bolts stuff. And that doesn't make it not issues. And there's a lot of little weird moments like that. So there's stuff like that, which is weird. And there's Dan suddenly wiping out a whole bunch of Sea Devils just by with the sword. I'm not one of those Sea Devils raised their own weapons to block it. Not a one. Not a one. They just all conveniently stood in a way that he could take out all of them in 2 slashes. Really. There's stuff like that. And none of that's good. But that's nuts and bolts stuff. That's stuff that is affected by possibly the difficulties of filming with COVID restrictions, possibly, having to shave time out of it if the thing just ended up being longer than they thought it was going to be, and them having to nickel and dime time out of it. And again, none of that is to defend it. None of these are good things that I'm pointing out. But the reason I'm pointing them out is because Chibnall at his worst engages in ideas that I don't think are worth engaging in the first frickin' place. That's kind of how I feel about The Timeless Child. That's not a problem specific to Chibnall, for the record. I still hold Moffat and friggin' Hellbent as the worst example of why would you even do this, regardless of whether or not I succeeded. Why would you even do that at all? But that's not what's going on here. Now, that doesn't make this the best that Chibnall can do. Chibnall can do better than this. This kind of falls in the middle with Chibnall, which is that the idea is perfectly sound. And there are bits and pieces and aspects and elements that are even good. Like I said, the performances from the guest cast kind of point to that. They're well characterized as far as the performers have a lot of confidence in the characters they're playing, but they're not well characterized in terms of the amount of screen time and the amount the audience actually gets to know them. So this isn't a case of the idea was never going to work. This is a case of this has the elements that could have worked with just a little more care and probably more time. So that's sort of where I'm frustrated by this one. I suppose I need to bring up the Doctor and Yaz. I don't know what else I was expecting at this point. In hindsight, I think it might have been, oh well, I was going to say foolish to expect, but I think it's surprising now in hindsight for me to think that people were expecting a much different response other than the Doctor basically saying, I would like to, but I can't. Because here's the thing. My thoughts on the ship aside, again, video that I've kind of done talking about it, like, I don't like the idea of Doctor in a romantic pairing, especially with a companion. I just don't. Like, as much as I love the chemistry between the Doctor and various Doctors and River, like, just the general idea of the Doctor romantically involved just it's not generally my thing. I don't really care for it. I really don't like it with a regular companion. The thing is, I'm not the only one who feels that way. And that's not me being like, you should listen to me. But I mean, like, the idea of the Doctor even kissing a companion was a taboo, like, the entire run of classic Doctor Who. Like, people need to remember, when Paul McGann's Eighth Doctor kissed the woman that was effectively his companion in the TV movie in 1996, that was a huge deal, and it ticked fans off. Now, modern era Doctor Who has kind of skirted the line on this, because we've had the Doctor share kisses with a lot more companions than I would like to have ever had happen, sometimes implied romantically, sometimes for weirdly contrived reasons, sometimes for comedic effect. But, you know, the show has kind of always skirted right up to the line. Like, the closest that it came was something like the 10th Doctor and Rose, where, while I will always appreciate at the very end of Doomsday that we don't hear the Doctor finish the sentence that he was saying to Rose, it's hard to imagine he was going to say anything other than I love you. But again, given how much of the fandom isn't here for shipping, and again, I'm not saying that that makes it a priority fandom, but I'm saying there's a needle to thread here. And something like that moment at the end of Doomsday gives it a case where, like, what the heck else was he going to say? Which is, to some degree, throwing a bone to the shippers. But we also don't actually have to hear him say it. We're just throwing a bone to people like me. So this is kind of trying to do a similar threading of the needle, acknowledging the attraction and the interest, but not actually moving forward with it. Which, I mean, for my personal opinion, as someone who's not really here to ever see the Doctor in a romantic relationship, is about the best that I personally could have hoped for. I understand if other people are going to be disappointed and feel like it's a cop-out. I would say it's actually super consistent with the way they've handled the Doctor and romantic inclinations in the modern era. You know, this leaning into it, not denying it, but also not actually pursuing it as a storyline. That's really kind of the way that modern era Doctor Who has largely handled it. And, you know, I still prefer the instances where that's not on the table between the Doctor and the companions, but now that tracks. It is one of the other things that, like, needed a little bit more space. Not necessarily that it needed more raw time, but I think if it had more, well, you know where it needed more space is we needed to introduce this entire idea of the Yaz and the Doctor being a thing earlier than the episode prior to this, because, like, that moment between the Doctor and Yaz, when the Doctor's like, I'm not a bad date, am I? And there's like this weird, awkward pause between them. That's real contrived, that line. But it's something that could have worked if it had been built up to longer than just the immediate prior episode. Like, honestly, the idea of Yaz crushing on the Doctor at the very least, if not the Doctor reciprocating, is something that really should have been introduced during Flux. Somewhere, at some point. And then look, I know, like, the people really into the ship will say, well, it was hinted at long before that. But again, I kind of did a video on that. Like, there was nothing definitive for a very long time. It was vague hinting that you could not be sure you weren't just reading into it. So to actually commit to doing it as a storyline, to my mind, should have happened at the latest partway into Flux, so that we could watch this understanding of their their attraction, how they're drawn to each other, grow between the characters in something more organic than, yeah, I'm not a bad date, am I? Which, like, it's not performed bad, and like I keep feeling this about Chibnall. Like, the outline of the scene would read fine. The actual dialogue that they have, it's not great. But that just kind of is what it is. And I did have fun with this. I enjoyed the Sea Devils. I enjoyed the sword fight. I liked the flying ship as briefly as we saw the dang thing. You know, this has the vibe and the fun atmosphere that I like out of pirate stories. So while I'm kind of hesitant to say that, like, I definitely don't love this. I'm hesitant to say that I even really like it. I will say I probably like it more than I would under any other circumstances, just for the pirate vibe. I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for pirates. Like, that's just a fact of me. And that gives you a little more leeway than sometimes some things probably deserve. I certainly don't regret watching this, and I don't think I'll mind watching it again. I'm not sure I'm going to jump on it. Like, I actually did watch Eve of the Daleks again after that aired, because I actually still maintain that the way the time loop was done was pretty decent. And while there were some stumbles in that, and I mentioned them in my review, like, I think that's one of Chibnall's better pieces. It's one of his tighter ones. It's decently done. I liked that. I'm not going to jump to watching this one again, but I also won't really have a problem watching it again. I won't dread watching it again. It'll just be like, oh yeah, this was just fun. And it's not amazing fun, because, you know, there are some Doctor Who episodes that are just fun, like Robots of Sherwood. That's just fun. But that's a level of fun that's significantly higher than this. But the degree to which I enjoy this is on this similar, yeah, that's fun kind of level. Like, nuts and bolts issues, needed more time, but despite itself, I still had fun for the most part. Of course, I should probably talk in some way about the next time on Doctor Who thing. I don't remember the shots from the end of Series 12 well enough to know for certain whether the images of Assad were new or recycled. I'm hoping that they're new, because Assad was a great villain and a great concept that was ultimately squandered, so I would love to have him back. We know we're getting the Master back, which also, in theory, is going to tie together the whole Timeless Child stuff and wrap that up completely. Which I suppose is the other reason that, like, the Doctor and Yaz thing had to go the way that it did. They don't have the time to actually explore the two of them in a relationship. So honestly, since they started it as late as they did, it's probably narratively, storytelling wise, it's better to just not, because it's going to be so brief. It's like, what was the point of even exploring it? So it's like, if they were going to, like, truly properly explore it, needed to start a heck of a lot sooner. But anyways, then of course there's the other thing. Tegan, Ace. Tegan with a gun feels off to me, especially given why Tegan left the TARDIS in the first place. Hoping we'll get an explanation for that. Ace with a gun. Oh yeah, I buy that. I buy that in a heartbeat. That, like, yeah, totally. So, a bunch of other people we saw. We saw Kate again in there. I haven't mentioned Dan from this episode. He was sweet and affable. He's Dan. He does what Dan does. And as far as the next time, I know some people are, like, really super, like, losing their minds over, oh, Ace and Tegan. I'm like, good. That'll hopefully be nice to see them back, but this thing's going to have a lot to do. In terms of being a regeneration story, theoretically tying off the Timeless Child story, dealing with the Sacha Dhawan Master in what might be his last appearance, who knows? Bringing in old characters, new old characters like Kate and old characters like Tegan or Ace. It's a lot, and I don't trust Chibnall to handle a lot. I feel like when he's done his best, it's with stories that were a lot simpler. And I think that's why I will always look at something like Eve of the Dogs and go like, that works so much better than Flux. Because the more he does, the less he knows how to balance it. But I will, as always, hope for the best. But for right now, Legend of the Sea Devils. What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe, Patreon. That's how I pay the bills. And I am able to do this as my living. Any amount you're able to contribute is of great help, but don't worry about it too much. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. End credits. I gotta shout out my top Patreon supporters, so thank you very much to Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, Oliver B, Melinda Walters, Leotha Boy, TT, Renobulax the Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Caspro, Adam Lefty Taylor, Shane Ross, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Brendan LaRose. Couldn't do it without you.